It's like that's what it would sound like.
He talks rhythmically. It's very rhythmic. The way he talks, it's real. It's just, God, it's so cool.
He influenced all the conversations of people like Monk, who had his own way of talking, but that was influenced by Prez. They wanted to say things you didn't quite understand that had double meanings, and you had to understand both meanings to understand what they were saying. And Prez was the real creator of that.
He internalized the whole description of the world as he saw it. And so he would tell you about it as he saw it.
He called the cops Bing and Bob.
He called everybody lady.
Got my little kiddies together.
We'll follow the swallow back home.
Ding dong.
He called a lot of people Prez.
Dizzy said, when he talked to me, he said, Prez, meaning Dizzy, Prez is bummed out. Lester Young himself is bummed out because Prez is playing Prez's stuff. The other person is playing my stuff. He said, Prez don't know what to do when everybody wants to be Prez. Prez.
And he spoke with my father and he called him Lady Heath. And my father didn't appreciate it too much. He was not of that era where he could accept that. You know, my father said, what's wrong with this guy? Call him in Lady.
How high was your hotel bill? He looked up and he said, chandelier.
Lester was a poet. I mean, he was a poet. And if language was what he chose to do instead of music, he would probably have been a pretty good poet. But my favorite one is that when Lester Young was standing somewhere and there was a racist in the conversation, he would say, I feel a draft. And all the musicians around him knew what that meant. And he would often say, I feel a draft. And, you know, sort of flick it off his shoulder like it doesn't bother him, but we should all be aware that there is one.
Cab Calloway said something very interesting in his autobiography of Minnie the Moocher and Me. He said, we were the first freedom riders. And he's referring to the Calloway Band and the Basie Band, which traveled throughout the South on buses, enduring terrible conditions.
You got to remember, that was a different world. I mean, they had to go in the back door. They couldn't stay at hotels in towns. They were treated like dirt, and yet people out there in front dancing and having a good time, and they get off the stage and they're treated like they'd have to eat a sandwich in the bus because they couldn't go in and get a sandwich. That's a different era, and Prez came out of that era.
There would be hell sometimes. I remember once we was in Atlanta, Georgia, and a cop came up and said, we don't have no white people and black people playing together. So, okay. So you pick them out. And the first guy he picked out was a mulatto. So, like I said, but he's colored. He said, well, the cop said, okay, all them light ones come over. So,
it's just a job, bro. But the people like music. That's what counts, you know?
Yeah.
Even some of them places where they play, they have them ropes and things like that. Just the people are there, you know? So you know they must love music. Because I wouldn't make no ropes to go here. Nobody. That's the way they do it. White on this side, colored on this side.
And yet he fell in love with a white woman and he married a white woman.
During the time Prez was in, to have a white wife anywhere was not strictly forbidden, but you're going to get a hard time.
He had violated racial law. He was the company of a white woman, and that was considered slavery. And to go for a black man in the South to be in the company in a love relationship with a white woman was a grievous violation of the law.
No eyes for lies. Nice eyes rise into beauty skies. No eyes for intrusion or delusion. No eyes for skin confusion.
The Basie Band members were subject to the draft during the war, but they had the advantage of moving around a great deal. They were playing in Los Angeles, late summer 1944, when a zoot suitor, they said, a young white zoot suitor approached Joe Jones and Lester Young, and was talking to them and jiving around and everything. And they were having a good time. And then suddenly he flashed his badge and said, report to the induction center first thing Monday morning. You, Joe Jones, and you, Lester Young.
I'm only Lester, a poor left-handed black man whom even the army wanted to forget. They gave me a rifle and took away my saxophone. They said I was antisocial, and when I raised my voice, they put me in a cell. The rifle has a single trigger. Press this, and a man is dead. The saxophone carries 18 to 21 brass keys, and as many keys of harmony as 2.5 octaves can contain. Press these keys, people dance and dream of children and the means to keep them alive.
Everything in the war was contrary to everything that Lester was about. Regimentation, giving orders without explanations and reasons, and he was all about gentleness, and he was all about love, and he was all about vulnerability, and you can imagine what he must have gone through.
He showed up at the induction center with his saxophone and a fifth of liquor, for example. And he told them that he smoked marijuana daily during the interview. But they ignored all that.
And Lester Young gets sent to Fort Gordon in Georgia, which is an incredibly segregated base in a segregated state when segregation is legal. He can't be in the orchestra or the main sort of army band because it's run by an African-American band leader who doesn't really like him and doesn't like jazz.
Prez and Papa Joe were in the service at the same time. And they've got this publicity photo with them playing, but they never played it. See, I mean, to show you that these people are conscious torturers.
And there's a small jazz unit there's only white soldiers, and one of them recognizes Lester Young or gets to know him, it's not clear which, and he wants them to play with them. And of course, for Lester, anytime you can get away from whatever the soldier duties are, like, that's a good thing. But the only way they're allowed to do it is they have to ritually enact their caste roles in the South. So the white soldier comes over, picks up Lester Young, says, hey, N-word, come with me. And they go to their commanding officer, and he says, I'm going to take him over and he's going to play music with us. Is that all right, Captain? And they say yes, and he says it again, hey, come with me. And he goes, yes, sir, boss, And they have to do that for Lester Young to play with them. So here's Lester Young, one of the great musicians in America in 1944. And the only way he can play with a band in the army is to be humiliated in order to sort of be snuck into a band of musicians who love playing with him. So it's so absurd and depressing.
But why did they draft a man like Lester Young? He had no business being in the army. Prez was an artist. Prez was a delicate human being.
He then, at some point, he has a commanding officer who hates him and eventually finds in his trunk some pills, and he gets court-martialed in what is a trial that is Kafkaesque in the sort of most apt sense. They keep asking Lester, have you ever used drugs? And he goes, oh, yes, I have. Have you ever used marijuana? Well, yes, I have. How often? Most nights. How often do you use pills? He goes, all the time. Why do you do that? So they're asking these questions as if they're damning and humiliating him by association, and he's answering them quite honestly. This is how my field works. It's what I do. So, of course, that didn't satisfy them, and he gets a dishonorable discharge. And I'm sure there were other parts of that experience we'll never know because there's no records.
I think it was a life-altering experience for him.
When he's asked about it after the war, Lester Young says, that was a terrible experience, nearly caused me to blow my top. And they ask a follow-up, and he goes, well, I wrote one song about it, and that's what I have to say. And he writes a composition called DB Blues, or Detention Barrack Blues. And that's his communication.